The clock struck midnight, and the streets of London were silent under a blanket of fog. Emily sat on her sofa, a half-read novel lying forgotten in her lap. The soft glow of the lamp illuminated her small flat, but her mind was far away, tangled in thoughts of James. James, her best friend for years, yet lately something about him had shifted. His lingering gazes, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, and the electric tension that sparked every time they were close, it all haunted her. Lost in thought, Emily was startled by a sudden knock at the door. She glanced at the clock. 12:15 a.m. Her heart skipped a beat as she hesitated, then rose to answer. When she opened the door, there he was. James stood there, his tousled brown hair damp from the fog, a bottle of wine in his hand, and a look in his eyes that Emily couldn't quite place. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice low but steady. "I kept thinking about you." Emily felt her breath catch. She stepped aside silently, letting him in. James walked in with an ease that belied the tension in the air. "You always come prepared," Emily said, gesturing to the wine with a nervous smile. James chuckled softly. "I thought we could talk properly." They settled on the sofa, the wine poured into mismatched glasses. The conversation started light. Work, mutual friends, the latest series they'd both been watching. But there was a current running beneath the surface, unspoken yet undeniable. Finally, James set his glass down and turned to her. "Emily," he began, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "I need to tell you something." Emily's stomach flipped. She braced herself, her hands gripping the edge of her glass. "I can't do this anymore," he said. Her heart sank. "Do what?" she whispered, barely able to get the words out. "Pretend," he replied, his eyes locking onto hers. "Pretend that I don't feel something more for you." The room seemed to shrink, the weight of his confession pressing down on her. Emily's mind raced. She'd imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was happening, she didn't know what to say. "James," she started, her voice trembling. He reached for her hand, his fingers warm and firm against hers. "Just tell me I'm not imagining it," he said, his voice raw. Emily looked at him, really looked at him. The vulnerability in his eyes mirrored her own. She set her glass down and leaned in closer. "You're not imagining it," she whispered. The words were barely out of her mouth before James closed the gap between them, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was both hesitant and urgent. Time seemed to stop as the world outside faded away. Emily melted into him, her hands sliding up to his shoulders as the kiss deepened. Every unspoken word, every bottled-up feeling poured out in that moment. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I've waited so long to say this," James murmured, his forehead resting against hers. Emily smiled, her cheeks flushed. "You're not the only one." The night stretched on, their confessions giving way to laughter, more kisses, and whispered promises. The city outside remained silent, but inside that little flat, a love that had been simmering for years finally ignited.